I ask that we commit to an enduring relationship. Kia ora koutou.
Materia Tuhoe.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, tēnā koutou I te whare, te manuhiri tuārangi, nā kaumātua, nā rangatira, nā tuakana koutou o nai Tuhoe, ko tai tautoko mai I tēnei rā, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai. Mr. Speaker, when you read through the historical account that's written in the bill, you realise the extent to which we are all victims of history, destined to repeat it unless the lessons are truly learned. And I was pleased to hear the Minister speak about exactly that in his first reading address this morning. Because when it comes to issues concerning Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Crown does seem hell-bent on repeating the colonisation process over and over again. And Tuhoe, as much as others know this only too well. From the historical account in the bill, you can see this repeated cycle where Tuhoe has asserted their absolute and unequivocal sovereignty, their nationhood. Then the Crown uses force to put down their rangatiratanga, then creates some kind of legal structure that, while rhetorically is supposed to deliver some restitution, actually is designed to take even further land, resources and mana from iwi. And then some decades later, there is an apology for all of those past actions. So what is an apology worth? History has repeated itself over and over in Tuhoe. And now, of course, Tuhoe is owed yet another apology from the Crown that may take still some years to come. Just a few weeks ago, it was the anniversary of the Tuhoe raids. Just the most recent example where the Crown goes into Tuhoe territory, uses the full force of the state against whānau and kuia and kaumātua and tamariki, and uses yet again the same justifications that have been used for 150 years for the exercise and abuse of that power. May Sir Tuhoe not have to wait a century for an apology for that process, for that colonial invasion of Tuhoe lands. Looking at the history, so people can see how it has repeated, Tuhoe was subjected to a completely unjust and entirely unjustifiable confiscation of land in 1865. They were not in rebellion. They were simply living as they always have and have always intended to, as an independent nation, as was their right then and their right now. The damage caused at that early stage was made significantly worse by the compensation court process, which returned much of the confiscated land to other Māori but excluded Tuhoe from the land that they had traditionally occupied and cultivated. After the confiscation, the Crown waged war into Urewera, extensively used scorched earth tactics and was responsible for the execution of unarmed prisoners and the killing of non-combatants. These wars caused Tuhoe to suffer widespread starvation and extensive loss of life. Tuhoe went from a strong, truly independent nation to a small, largely landless group, all within a 5-year period. Eventually, the Crown withdrew its forces and agreed to leave Tuhoe to manage their own affairs. Sounds rather familiar. A governing council of chiefs, Te Whitu Te Kau, was then established to uphold the mana motuhake in Urewera. But then there was the Native Land Court, yet another grand idea, grand structure of government, which helped to further alienate the remaining land. The Crown indeed induced Tuhoe to sell a large area of land at Waikare Moana by threatening to confiscate their interests if they did not sell. In 1896, Parliament enacted the Urewera District Native Reserve Act. This provided for local self-government over 650,000 acres of the Urewera Reserve, and for decisions about the use of that land to be made collectively and according to Māori custom. And Tuhoe at that time quite rightly believed that this system would protect their lands from sale and deliver them the genuine decision-making, but the Crown did not implement the self-government provisions of that Act and undermined its protective provisions. Let that not be the case again. The further dodgy tactics and, in my view, racist law was used by the state to take even more land. Harsh tactics were used to acquire land at Waikaremoana, where the Crown assumed control over Lake Waikaremoana and resisted attempts for decades by the owners to secure title to the lake bed. In 1916, 70 armed police arrested Tuhoe prophet Urewera at Maunga Pohatu. 2 Tuhoe men were killed during that arrest. Urewera was cleared of 8 charges, including sedition, but was convicted of moral resistance. He was convicted of moral resistance, the only justifiable action in the face of decades of abuse of power, of threats, of structural racism and discrimination, of murder. Moral resistance. Mr. Speaker, the history continues on. In 1954, the Crown established Te Urewera National Park, which included most of Tuhoe's traditional lands. The Crown neither consulted Tuhoe about the establishment of the park nor about its expansion in 1957, and did not recognise Tuhoe as having any special interest in the park or its governance. And national park policies have led to restrictions on Tuhoe's customary use of this land and adjoining land. Again, we have the exercise and expression of rangatiratanga by Tuhoe, violence in various forms, structural and physical, perpetrated by the Crown, legal structures deliberately built to deliver unfairness over and over again. So we have recently used the word deal to describe settlements, and I know that the Minister finds that difficult to hear, but I do think it is the best and truest description of the settlement process. But I do want to acknowledge the Minister for the unique and innovative agreement concerning Urewera National Park. I do think the Minister really has made a great step forward for finding new ways of recognising and delivering to iwi Māori decision-making over their lands, while trying to address the huge public issue that largely comes from people not understanding the true history of Māori in this country. So we are really pleased about the return, at least in some form, of Te Urewera to Tuhoe. It is a novel legal arrangement, giving Urewera its own legal identity, its own legal status, and then whose interests are managed by another group of people, by the board. We are very pleased that the board will, in just a few years' time, be dominated by Tuhoe people, so that there is genuine decision-making, by majority decision-making by those who are uri of that place, and so it should be. We are thankful, actually, to Tuhoe for their ongoing commitment to public access and public engagement in the decisions around the Te Urewera. And we need to make sure the public understand the extent to which, in any settlement, including this one, iwi Māori make great gifts to the public, make great gifts to the public interest, even in the face of decades and decades of structural abuse. So we are thankful for those gifts here. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Greens have always been very highly critical of the settlement process, where iwi, who are the aggrieved party, the victim of historical attacks, have no authority or control over that process. We do understand that the necessary boundaries in a negotiation should be jointly determined by the parties and not set by just one. And we will continue with this critique of the process. But we do want to expressly acknowledge the work that Tuhoe has done to come to a very good agreement with the Crown over this, and developing novel ways, innovative ways of finding decision-making authority, returning some of that rangatiratanga back. We support the bill. We look forward to hearing more of the stories in the Select Committee process and the swift passage of this legislation. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Honourable Peter Sharples.